fans, my name is Taylor and welcome back to Above the Yellow Line. I am thrilled for you all to watch this episode today as we have a very special and first-time guest to the show, Rob Tiongson. Of course, he runs the Podium Finish, so I'm going to pick his brain a little bit about what it took to start the outlet and what it takes to run it, as well as some advice he might have for those trying to work their way into the industry. Also, as a longtime fan, Rob shares his story about how he came into the sport and also his takes on what happened last weekend at Circuit of the Americas. And then finally, to end the video, we will have a pre-race show of the Coca-Cola 600 happening this weekend with some track facts, some statistics, and our race picks. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hello race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all things NASCAR. This is a preview of the Coca-Cola 600 today, and I have a guest. Please welcome Rob Tiongson. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Taylor. It's good to be on ATYL.
Yeah, I am so excited to have you here. Rob, of course, runs the Podium Finish, a place I love to write for and we continue to write for. So we're going to talk a little bit about Rob later. Rob's going to talk a little bit about himself, his story, but I want to start by taking a look back at COTA last weekend because there's some things I know Rob has to say about it. I know we definitely want to have a conversation about this, Rob, and just to get a different perspective on the show. So let's begin by rewinding the clocks here with this past Sunday at Circuit of the Americas for the Echo Park, Texas Grand Prix. So my viewers know what I think about this race, but Rob, I am curious about your thoughts as a whole. What did you think just in general about Circuit of the Americas?
I think it's a really fine track for NASCAR, just because of the fact it's a different kind of road course than what they've been used to for basically the last 35 years, which is how old I am. So, most of these road courses they've been on have been basically purpose-built for stock cars. Where COTA is basically a Formula One type racetrack, an FIA grade 1 track that's in the US, and it challenged a lot of the drivers. I think it challenged the equipment too, clearly because we saw with Daniel Suarez, he had the issue with his linkage with his transmission, I believe. So, I mean, it really tested everything, and that's kind of what you want to see for the most part in the race. I think even though I'm a huge proponent of the Echo Park, Texas Grand Prix, we can all agree that we didn't like seeing the visibility issues in stage 2. I think we could have, but there could have been a better job with drying the track, getting it prepped up with how the conditions on last Sunday here in Austin were pretty miserable with the weather. I mean, there was the Gulf of Mexico moisture that kept, coming towards our direction, and it kind of greatly reduced visibility. It made for a lot of standing water, especially between turns 11 and 12 with that long backstretch. So I think overall, those are things that NASCAR has learned from. And we've talked about that off the podcast, but overall, I thought it was a great race weekend. I know I'm not Kevin Harvick and I'm not going to say, I can't really agree with everything he said, but I'm not a race car driver. And I certainly hope, when and if they return to COTA next year, that Mother Nature cooperates, even if that means 100 degrees and sunshine and baking heat. I think that will make for a great show, but I like what I saw.
I wanted to ask you a bit, because I'm assuming based on that comment, you want NASCAR to return to COTA, correct? Is that correct?
Oh, I do, for sure. I mean, we have to accept the fact that NASCAR is no longer going to just be this oval-bound series. We've seen IndyCar evolve from just basically being a super speedway series, well before it was the NTT IndyCar series, when it was the Champ Car and Kart, and previous iterations, it was always basically like this huge super speedway type series with a few street road courses and street courses. And now it's basically a road course dominant series with a few exceptions, like obviously this Sunday with Indianapolis, and of course the Texas races earlier in the season, where NASCAR, of course, and I'm pretty sure you talked about this a bit on your show, the next gen car is coming out pretty soon. And from what a lot of the drivers have been telling me and a lot of the feedback we've seen online, it's a road course friendly race car. It seems to be purpose built to be like our modern street cars. And we don't drive in circles in our modern street cars. We drive on winding roads, a lot of turns, and terrible conditions sometimes. So I mean, if we want to readapt the win on Sunday, buy on Monday mentality, road courses are the direction to go.
absolutely agree. I think after, because we all watched the next gen reveal. I looked at it and I was like, these cars they're a little wider. They're a little, the wheels are a little bigger. Like they're definitely made for road course racing. And so I think maybe I talked about this a little bit on the last show. I've definitely shared my opinion on this, but I think if NASCAR is continuing to go the direction with the road courses as they are, and they're wanting to introduce a street course, they talked about the Chicago street course, then I think that's the direction, the next gen car fits that perfectly. Now, before we move on, I don't know if you're comfortable talking about the kind of the controversial call with, they ended the race with Chase Elliott in the lead. I know we talked about this a little bit on the podium finish. It's going to be in the podium review this week. I'm very excited that I had the chance to voice my opinion on this, but Rob, do you think they ended the race the correct way when they did?
That it's almost been a week now. I think so, honestly. The race fan in me and journalist in me wanted to see it go all the way because, as I mentioned in our group chat, the sunset in Austin was not until 8:25 p.m. But we saw how long it took just to drive the racetrack. And even when they brought the Air Titans to drive the backstretch, it wasn't a perfect solution. I mean, the water came back and visibility became pretty terrible. And we also had that heart-stopping moment when Kurt Busch basically almost plowed into his brother Kyle. That was unbelievable. I do not know how he saved it. Right. And I think that was basically, NASCAR's way of saying, maybe we got to be careful because we don't want to get these guys hurt and girls hurt too. So I wanted to see it go all the way. I mean, we had some great strategy unfolding. It would have been so dramatic to see, who's going to blink first. Was Kyle Larson going to finally break out of his bridesmaid streak that he's been on lately? Was someone else going to be in position to sneak up and steal the win, like AJ Allmendinger? We're never going to know. But even then, I mean, Chase Elliott already built a huge lead, so it's not like he got lucky and like David Rudem in 2009 Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte. This was just plain old being in position. Like Richard Petty said, if you put yourself in the right position and let circumstances dictate the outcome, that's what he did.
Definitely agree. I'm a little biased. I mean, Hendrick Motorsports, I'm a Chase Elliott fan. I'm a little biased, but I mean, he built a pretty substantial lead, as you mentioned, and even if he had to go into pit, he would have still had a pretty decent finish. I mean, Kyle Busch pit and he finished in the top 10 in 10th place. So I think I do agree with you. It was the right call. I have a whole list of other things I can mention with it, but I want to end talking about COTA before we move on because, this is the next week, but I want to ask you constructive feedback for NASCAR. Having a little bit of constructive feedback is a good thing. It helps you grow. It helps you be better. So from your point of view as a longer time NASCAR fan than I have been, do you think there's something that NASCAR could do better, something that they could have done? We know that they're testing more rain tires at Richmond. They just tested them Monday, I think. And Joey Logano made some comments. He talked about they tried different mud flats on the cars, and it helped a little bit, but not a lot. And, they talked about having these tires be used during the playoff races this year. And for me, that's kind of a red flag. The playoffs, that's a big thing. If you're going to use a new tire for the first time in a whole field of cars, I don't really like that idea. So I want to ask you about that as well. But Joey Logano said the first thing we have to do is make sure these drivers are safe. Make sure we're safe first, and then we can talk about the tire. But what else do you think NASCAR should implement, add, any rule changes? An opinion. What do you think?
Well, I think just speaking on road course racing first, we have the forecast ahead of time. Dr. Aaron Studwell, one of my friends in the industry, he's pretty spot on about the forecast. But there's a lot of smart people like him, like Dr. Studwell, anyone in the NWS, that can really nail the forecast. And they were pretty accurate about the fact that it was not going to be good. They were saying this a week ahead of time. And, I'm not saying NASCAR didn't pay attention, but,
yes.
Certainly paying attention to the forecast ahead of time would be helpful. When we notice standing water building up and it's coming up towards a stage break, let's pause the racer a little bit, don't let them run around and waste fuel. And we're depriving, everybody about a good stage 2 or stage 3 finish. Let's take the time to dry the track, prep it up. Even if that means we're going to have to put the red flag out. I mean, I hate red flags. As I say a lot. I know Luis Torres, our colleague, is a huge red flag fanatic, but I'm not. But in this case, I say go ahead and do that. And I think he mentioned too, like how if they can figure out a way with short tracks, how there's not as much like water splashing out of the tires. Why can't we do that with road courses? So those are a few things I want to see happen in the future. Now, as far as the ovals and speedways, I think it is possible to do that, but I don't think we can race in the rain in an oval, not in our lifetime. But say if the rain stopped and the track's starting to dry up, but it's not completely dry, let's give it a try. I mean, there's nothing better than having at least 40 stock cars out there, putting some heat on the track with their exhaust pipes, and eventually the rear diffuser to dry up the track. So those are some things I think they can take in terms of constructive criticism to excel with this, because in reality, Mother Nature is never going to acquiesce with NASCAR or any event. So we just have to work with it.
Yeah, Mother Nature she has a mind of her own. We know that last year with the races, at least it was 13 out of the 36 races, I believe, that were affected by weather. That's almost 40% of the schedule if you do the math. And to me, that's obnoxious. But we can't control that. NASCAR can control that. But I think if we continue to test these rain tires, try to figure things out, especially more testing is what I'm honing in on. You do better when you practice things before you do kind of let's just run it during a real race and see. To me, that's not really smart. I know testing is so hard, but the more we test these things, the more we test these rain tires, we test the mud flats, the next gen car is going to bring a whole slew of more testing as we figure out where its pitfalls are. But for sure, I think NASCAR should continue racing in the rain, should continue to try that out. Driver safety in mind, absolutely. So with that, we're gonna close out. We're gonna wrap up our COTA discussion, and then I want to look ahead. But first, Rob. So I briefly introduced you at the beginning of the show, but the viewers might not know much about you. So I wanted to take this time to kind of ask you about your journey in NASCAR. I wanted to ask you about the Podium Finish in particular as well, kind of how you got into this world. So would you mind kind of sharing your story a little bit for the viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, again, I'm Rob Tiongson. I am the editor-in-chief of the PodiumFinish.net, which is a motorsports media outlet that focuses on coverage within the world of NASCAR, IndyCar, ARCA, and other forms of racing as well. We've been around since 2008, originally as a small little segment on Bleacher Report, when I was one of the original featured columnists for their NASCAR section. And then I eventually formed the website on its own in 2010. And we've been basically, we were the podiumfinish.com for a while. And then I eventually migrated outside of an intermediary sports media outlet and really went independent in 2015 and changed over to the podiumfinish.net. We are a really remote motorsports media outlet because we've got basically a bunch of people across the country, a lot of young folks, a lot of older folks like me that are on there. When I say older, I mean, I'm only, again, 35 years old, but compared to most of y'all who watch the show, I'm probably an old geezer at this point. But that's okay. I accept that I am in the older end of the millennial spectrum. Kind of more about me personally. I'm originally from the Boston, Massachusetts area. And yes, the first thing people are going to say is I don't have a Boston accent, which I don't because, to be kind of frank, I grew up with a speech impediment, and I was diagnosed with autism at a really young age. But with some therapy and a lot of good support growing up, I kind of grew out of being very shy and kind of how can I say this? Not very communicative to somebody who probably talked a little bit too much. And now I finally found the blend of when to talk a lot and when not to. But I was kind of a really interesting kid because, yes, I watched a lot of kid shows growing up on PBS and all that. But I watched a lot of news with my dad. And that's probably why I kind of have this broadcaster tone with my approach. So kids, watch the news, but not for the politics. Watch it because I think there's some good speakers out there. But anyways, to kind of keep things on track, if you will, I became a NASCAR fan 30 years ago. So yes, that's how long I'd been in the circles of NASCAR. And it was by accident. the short story to kind of make sure your audience doesn't fall asleep on us. We were channel surfing because it was one of those weekends when the cable company was like, hey, you people who can't afford cable, we're gonna like let you guys see every channel until the end of the weekend. And we were just so bored because the Red Sox team was on and they were getting killed by whoever was playing that they were playing against. There's no basketball or football or hockey going on in August. So my dad just happened to be on ESPN, and I think I might have said something to the variant of like, hey, keep it there, I want to see this. And it was like the final 10 laps of the Champion Spark Plugs 400 at Michigan International Speedway. And for you younger folks, I recommend watching that on YouTube. There's plenty of awesome long form and short clips where you can see why I became so enthralled within the world of NASCAR. But basically, it was a 10 lap side-by-side finish between Davey Allison and Dale Jarrett, and they were just like double wide. They were trading paint, but not crashing each other. And then on the last lap, Dale Jarrett just inched ahead of Allison to get his first career Cup win at a then young 35 years old age. So I was young in 1991, literally, and my age group. But anyways, he won his first race. And as a little kid at 5 years old, I was just like so amazed that they didn't crash each other. The cars are going so fast. And then these people were just so normal. They weren't like, these posh, oh, I'm too good for you, don't look at me kind of like superstars. They were just normal folks who happened to put on a good show for so many people at the track and watching in their living room. So I became a huge NASCAR fan, but I would say 1993 is when I really got into it because we finally got cable in our house.
Yes.
Probably because of the fact that my parents, they were really hard workers. They still are to this day, and they thrive at their job. They wanted to give my sisters and I, the best life possible, and that included TV. I mean, that's the perks, I guess. If you are a good student in the classroom, they were like, okay, let's see what you're like if you have MTV and ESPN. And so I got to watch a lot more races, and I noticed this rainbow looking race car with the number 24. And I was like, yeah, right there, Jeff Gordon. I was like, this guy is so cool. And this is during the time he still had his little mustache. But I thought he was so cool because, little known fact about me, I had a mustache when I was a little kid. Now, not pronounced, but I had like a pencil thin little mustache above my upper lip right here. So just imagine I was a little pint-sized kid, little mullet, and an earring because I thought I was like so cool, like MC Hammer and Bobby Brown. And that my journey took off from there. So I became a Jeff Gordon fan. I tuned in religiously. Even if we were like, we're gonna go do something fun. No, I got to stay in the living room. I've got to watch this race. And I bought a lot of cars. I don't have them in this office right here. This is my niece's little room, and when she's staying over during the week. But anyways, going to do the short story version. Let's fast forward to 2007, 2008. So I moved to the Philippines, and looking back on it, great journey. But my goodness, I was homesick. I was 21 years old. I didn't know how to speak Tagalog. And, I wasn't really making a lot of friends at the time, maybe because I was probably homesick and not very sociable. And it was a huge culture shock for me, even though I am a Filipino American, as you can clearly see. So one of the ways I coped with homesickness was writing about NASCAR. And I've said this in previous shows with other folks, but I had this arrogant thought that I could be better than Bob Pockrass and anyone else who was in the industry. Obviously, I have learned there's a lot more to it than just that. I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a bit. But I decided to, happenstance, go on to Bleacher Report. And I was like, why isn't there a lot of NASCAR coverage? It's just about, Kobe Bryant being this awesome Laker player, or, a lot of hockey coverage. Why isn't there NASCAR? So, I just made this little blog entry about AJ Allmendinger and why don't other media outlets cover the midfield? And when I realized if I took it a little bit more seriously, maybe I could make something of this. So then 2 months later, I became one of the featured columnists, which included Kelly Crandall, who obviously has made it in the sport since then. So I'm part of that class. For her, it's worked out really well, and she's done her part. For me, it's been a little bit more difficult just because real life happened, and I had a few hiatuses within my career. But basically, long story short, I pushed along. I work a real job, obviously to pay the bills. But when I'm home, it's all about racing, and I just love covering the sport, despite how much of it has changed, not just with the audience, but everything. I mean, next year we're gonna have a totally new car, which I'm so excited about, just because, and I mentioned it earlier. I think it's going to bring back the whole "if you win on Sunday, you'll buy it on Monday" kind of mentality. And I'm a car buff myself, so looking forward to that.
I think with the next gen car, kind of to go off that point too, for newer fans coming into the sport, kind of having a hard time understanding these rules packages, understanding these cars, it's kind of it resets everything just a bit. So it's easier if you are a newer fan like me, who still, even though I know the rules packages, I still struggle to understand it a bit. Everyone has to kind of relearn. The drivers themselves and the teams have to relearn some things, and there's going to be an added gear in the car. So it's a whole relearning process. I think that'll be good for the fans, and everyone can kind of jump in at the same time with that. I do want to ask you real quick before we jump into the Coca-Cola 600. I want to talk to you about the Podium Finish. Now, there are a lot of people coming into the journalism side of NASCAR. To me, I started watching the sport like 2016 is when I really started watching, and I won't go into my story. This is not what this is about, but I've watched a little bit beforehand. But since I started this channel and started really getting into it in, I guess, this year, really, and I mean last year, everyone wants to be a journalist now. Everyone wants to be in the sport. So knowing you and your success, and you've gotten into the industry, what is it like running something like the Podium Finish, and what advice would you give to people trying to move into this particular outlet, this particular job, if you could give any advice?
Being independent is very difficult because you're going against a lot of bigger outlets. It's no different really than being a team owner in NASCAR. And I've said this in our chat room within our group. If you think of media outlets in the spectrum of Formula One, you've got NASCAR.com, you've got Motorsport.com, and all those bigger outlets, and they're kind of like the Mercedes and Red Bull of the media outlets. And then you got Front Stretch, you've got Motorsports Tribune, Racing Refresh, and all that. And then us, I think we're kind of like in the midfield, if you will, because of the fact that we don't have a lot of resources. We don't have advertisers, even though if you go on our website, you'll see them. Those are not really by me. Those are just general ones. But it's a lot of hard work. You don't just say, I'm going to write an article and that's it. You have to, come up with content that's going to be relevant, fresh, connecting with the audience. And you have to either think of it in the long term and in the short term of things. When I say short term, of course, that's race weekend content. In terms of long term, that's about paying attention to trends. Like you've mentioned on your podcast, the whole William Byron top 10 streak, which nobody seemed to pay attention to. And I never understood that. Like they were just dismissing it as if it was some like lucky, grandiose type thing. But no, he really brought it until COTA. And if it hadn't red flagged, I'm pretty sure we'd be talking about another top 10 he just earned, but he was just one position short. Media, just being a journalist is really tough because it's one thing to want to do it, but it's another to learn the ethics involved in it. And I don't want to really get too deep into it, but obviously this week was tough for the stock car world. We're not going to dance around the fact that unfortunately Eddie DeHaan's situation with the number 9 team has kind of overshadowed a little bit of what built up for the excitement from COTA going into the 600. Now there's some media outlets and some journalists who jumped ahead and took the chance to cover the story. And I made the executive decision at 3 a.m., which I don't typically wake up at. But when I saw our chat room explode with like, whoa, whoa, and I was like, guys, settle down. Let's not jump into this yet, because when it gets to legal issues, those are tough. But kind of just keeping to the basics, I think if you want to be a successful journalist, you have to take criticism. You can be a little hard on yourself, but don't be too hard on yourself, especially if you make a mistake. You just learn from it, take it in the chin, and apply it next time around, and just know that struggles are going to happen. I know you and I have talked about this off the record a little bit. And it's a really demanding industry if you're going to want to be in this. I've seen a lot of younger folks, since I've started my outlet and since I started my career, kind of phase out because they lost interest. And my advice is, think of this whole journey as like a long Coca-Cola 600 life experience. It's not, you know, get off the gates on stage one and win. You're gonna struggle. You're gonna feel worn out, and it's totally okay. You got to attend to your mental health, and just make sure you have a good support system around you. Whether it's, if you're at a media outlet like the podiumfinish.net or somewhere else, hopefully you've got some friends around that you can count on, and makes things in life really interesting and fresh. So, other thing is, go to school. Because
Yes.
a lot of folks just think they can write about it and that's it. No, I mean, you don't have to major in journalism, but it certainly would help to take some courses about it, because there's a lot of things about it that's really unique, fresh. Some of it's common sense, and some of it just cannot be taught on the internet. And whether it's in high school or junior college or grad school, and not a plug for St. Bonaventure University, but you got to go get your time in the classroom. And if you do so, you won't regret it, because you're going to learn some valuable concepts, and you might even build some professional contacts in the end. And then my last advice really is to network the hell out of yourself, because you are your best salesman or saleswoman in this case. So, I mean, I don't mean sex sells or anything like that, but like, if you have a mentor in the industry, talk to them, connect with them on social media. Don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. I made the risky chance to just talk to Steve Burns, I think in 2009, 2010, when I was with Bleacher Report. And, he was just so friendly, so accommodating to me, even though it's just this young kid in the Philippines. But I explained to him my whole backstory like I had with you. And, he took the time with me after I interviewed him just to tell me what I can do and all that. And I always like the fact that he said that I was a different writer because I write from the heart, and it's not like a robotic tone. Unfortunately, we lost Steve in 2015, and to this day, I don't think I go a day without thinking about him. And then my other mentor, of course, would be Bob Jenkins, even though he's an announcer. But as you know, he's having a really tough fight with brain cancer. So, definitely think about Bob. And Bob, if you do happen to watch this, certainly the whole Podium Finish team is pulling for you. And then my other mentor in the industry would be Steve Wade, Stephanie Boyd-Durner, so many people, Louis Frank, I can think of. And believe it or not, I do aspire after a driver. And of course, that driver is Jeff Gordon. Not that I'm showing any bias. I will critique the heck out of him as a broadcaster, but I love that he was so different than the grain back in the 90s. And that's kind of how I view myself, not only as a Filipino American, and not only just because of the fact that I'm becoming a little bit more open about my experiences with being autistic, but just the fact that there's only one you. So you've got to build that brand around yourself. And if it's a shtick, it's a shtick. It's okay. But just be yourself, have fun, keep fresh, and just try to remember, if you didn't have a good race weekend, go at it again. If you had a great race weekend, build off of that. And just, if you have fans that follow your content, interact with them, even if it's just a like or retweet or a thank you. They feel grateful for that. And if you do that, they're going to tell their friends and family, like, hey, Taylor Kitchen's really cool. We want to watch your podcast, like I've been telling people to do with yours. So, yeah.
I would honestly, everything you said, I echo. And the one thing that really sticks with me is, and I actually watched a podcast on this yesterday, was this is not just you sit in front of your screen and you talk. This is not just, I'm just going to sit down and write a few thoughts. It's work. It's, content creators, whether it's journalism, whether it's, influencer, whether, whatever it is legitimate work. And I came into this not realizing it. And I am literally day and night on my computer writing, whether it's for the Podium Finish, a different outlet, whether it's for my podcast. You're always preparing, you're always looking for stats. And I think the main thing is, and Rob and I talked about this off camera, but something that's really stuck with me is you will get burnt out. You definitely will, and that's okay. But you need to remember why you fell in love with the sport, and that's major. Take time for your mental health, take time for yourself, but remember the reason why you wanted to do this in the first place. And that's probably one of my biggest pieces of advice right now, is something that I took from you, Rob, that we talked about. It's also marketability, as Rob said. You are your own kind of PR person. I would also say on the side, PR classes after this week probably necessary if you're wanting to get into this industry. I'm excited to be going back to school, as well as Rob's going back to do grad school. I took a break from school. I'm going back, journalism and PR. I'm very excited to do that. But definitely, networking, like being your own advocate, being yourself, kind of finding your shtick, where you fit in, interacting with your audience. Every point you made, Rob, if you're a viewer wanting to go into the NASCAR journalism side of things, or even if it's just journalism in general, or even any job you have, great skills. I would add respect to it, be respectful. Professionalism does take you a long way. I'm going to get off my high horse. Just so many good points you made, Rob, and I think we just have to echo throughout the industry right now. But yeah, so thank you so much for sharing your story. It was interesting. We've talked about it a little bit off camera, but just kind of hearing more in depth was really cool to hear. I hope the audience really enjoyed that, and they can take a lot away from it, especially, and a lot of newer fans I know watch this show, and I think there's a lot we can learn. So I will thank you so much, first off, for doing this. And so now, we're taking a side off of, our personal notes and our personal stories. I want to jump into this weekend with the Coca-Cola 600. We got to talk about track facts. We got to line up our odds, and we got to talk about our race picks. So, Rob, just, don't mind me rambling. We're going to list off some track facts starting now. The track length is 1.5 miles. The race length is 600 miles and 400 laps. This race is different because there are 4 stages in this lengthy race. Each stage will be 100 laps long. And so I do not have a lineup for you today because we actually have practice and qualifying this weekend. Some people are happy about that. I know some people aren't. I know Rob is a big fan of qualifying and practice. I'm excited it's back. It gives teams a chance, and especially with this long race, it is so important to get those reps in. So, that is a very good thing. But moving into the race itself, Rob, I want to ask you about, very briefly, what's your experience with this race? What do you like about it? What you don't? Kind of as I say older fan, just because I know I'm newer to this, but what do you think? Do you think the race should be cut short? Just in general, I'm throwing a lot at you, but general thoughts.
So this race is the longest NASCAR race of the season. And it's the kind of race that, unlike the other ones you'll see before and after this changes every single minute of when it starts. So yes, it is divided into 4 100 lap stages, but they're all not going to be the same. And all of these drivers are going to fight the handling condition, no matter how well they did in practice or how well they did in qualifying. They're going to be chasing that handling, because when this race kicks off a little bit after 6 p.m. Eastern time, it's still in daylight, a little bit late in the day, but not quite sunset, because I think it's around 7 or 8 in Concord. So the first 2 stages are really just about pacing yourself. If you happen to be fast off the truck, you're going to probably want to just try to maintain that pace. And if you're struggling, your focus is just trying to either undercut a little bit, especially if the leader's catching you, to get fresher rubber and hopefully gaining some time and getting back on the lead lap. But really, I think the key thing is just making sure that you have an adjustable car. So really, you can't take away too much in the first 2 stages. Even during the telecast on the TV and radio side, they're gonna probably hooping and hollering about who's off to a good start. I really start to pay attention on stage 3 and 4, obviously, because that's going to be either towards close to sunset or already in darkness. And that's when the lap times are going to pick up. That's when those cars are going to start to stick like glue on the track. So we have got that to consider. And I think the PJ1 substance is on the track this weekend. So that's going to be a factor as well. And just to kind of be brief about what PJ1 is, in layman terms, it's basically like the sticky stuff that helps those cars stick to a part of the track a little bit better than if they just had to build it with the rubber off the Goodyear tires. So that's basically what it is. It's like not an adhesive, but like a sticky thing, if you will. And a lot of the SMI tracks use that, like Texas and New Hampshire. But it's a long race game. So you have to fight the handling. You might even try to stretch your fuel mileage too, because this is one of those few races where fuel mileage can finally be a factor, unlike other races where stage three could be a little bit of a longer distance schedule or shorter, depending on what NASCAR does. So when we talk about that, and then the favorites, obviously Hendrick Motorsports is going to be at the top of the forefront, just because they have been crushing it on the intermediate tracks. I mean, Kyle Larson has easily shown why he's a threat, and why, when he came back after his incident and his learning lesson last year, why he's still a competitive stock car driver. And I don't know if the PJ1, I haven't checked yet, and I probably should have, if it's going to be on the top lane. But if it isn't, I'm sure he's going to try to make it work still anyway.
Oh, yeah.
He's just high wide and always doing the Harry Gant line. William Byron's another guy I'm thinking of in terms of a contender. And then Alex Bowman, with being a veteran, if you will, and having to be that older driver along with Larson, I think this race suits them pretty well. And then, of course, Chase Elliott, even with the spotter change situation happening, I still think he has to be at the top of the forefront. But we also cannot ignore Joe Gibbs Racing. For some reason, all weekend long, even though I've already made my race pick for our preview, Martin Truex Jr. is just standing out to me just because of the fact that he is so good at these longer races. I mean, these are the ones where, I don't know if you've heard of this expression, where sometimes the driver feels like they're literally falling off the seat like this because it's so long and it wears you out. And even though the forecast is not your typical hot, humid Memorial Day Sunday night race, it's still going to be a taxing event for them because they're going to be in these tin cans for a long time. So whoever's the best in terms of their physical fitness, their hydration, and just basically being patient, those are the drivers I look at excelling this weekend. And Kurt Busch, of course. We'll probably talk about him a little bit longer after this, but for some reason, he's another driver I think of just because since 2015, he has not finished worse than 10th in this event. So, I mean, that's a really interesting little statistic I had found prior to, being on the podcast, was just Kurt Busch being so steady, so consistent. And, this is the kind of race that suits him well, where the younger drivers are going to hopefully learn to exercise patience. And hopefully the audience can appreciate that it's a different kind of race. And yes, it is long. The one thing I would wish it would be fixed a little bit, I would say I want us to start a little bit earlier and still end towards nighttime. But with it being at 6 p.m., it's not too late like the Southern 500. I love that race. But my God, that's a race I struggle with just to kind of keep up with, because it can get really late in the East Coast for y'all over there. And even in Texas, it's a long one. So start time really would be the biggest thing, I'd say. And I wish we could have the opportunity for drivers to do the Indianapolis 500 Coca-Cola 600 double. For some reason, that's not a thing this year.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, like, at some point I would love to kind of have a discussion, kind of like I do a walk the line segment where we kind of talk and debate things. I haven't done that in a while. I'd love to bring that back, but like, what drivers should we bring to the Indy 500 from NASCAR to kind of get the wheels turning a little bit? I think that'd be such a fun conversation. But I did, you started to mention kind of the length of the race. You started to mention, what time we start. Before a perfect segue into lining up our odds here, but before we do that, I want to talk about the race length. Very, very briefly, do you think that NASCAR should shorten this race? I know that was I guess as of this week, a pretty, intense discussion amongst fans.
Absolutely not. I mean, I normally would say yes. There's a lot of races I think that could be shortened just because of the fact that we have a younger audience. But you've probably heard about the crown jewel races, and it's debatable what a crown jewel race is. But being an older observer, fan, and writer and journalist in the sport, there's a few races that are going to be the exception. The Daytona 500, the Coca-Cola 600, and yes, even the Southern 500 as late as it starts. I think those are the only three races that do not need to be touched in length. But do we really need 300 plus laps at Texas Motor Speedway? And that is my home track.
Mhm.
I'm sorry if our friend Zachary is going to be upset to hear this, but no, we do not need to be there for 500 something miles. That's a long race. I
I will
think
say
whoever
he might agree. He might actually agree it needs to be shortened. We'll have to chime him in on this at some point, but I think he agrees.
It's a touchy subject just because of the fact that a lot of Texans are proud about everything. They're proud about their Dairy Queen. Even though it's not a Texas restaurant, they're proud about Church's Chicken or Texas Motor Speedway, Texas football, Texas this, Texas that, and it's like, take it easy. I mean, I'm drinking Texas water right now, and
Hey.
it's fine. It's just Nestle water I'm drinking, but I think a lot of the races should be shortened because we have a younger audience. But the 600 is a beautiful spectacle on its own because it's kind of an insane thing I'm about to say. It's our version of the Rolex 24 without the driver changes, and it's definitely shorter than that race, of course, but
yeah,
it's an endurance event.
I would say just kind of I guess a newer fan perspective. And for me in general, I have a shorter attention span, I would say. I like quick content. I like knowing things like right as they are, And so for me, if you take the race out of context of its symbolism, its importance, yeah, I think for a newer audience, the race needs to be shortened. However, we know that this race honors the men and women that serve. It honors the men and women that have served and are serving. And I think cutting it short would be a shame, honestly, because it's an endurance race, as you said, and these men and women every day face endurance, face hardship, face battles, and that's kind of what it symbolizes. These drivers are putting themselves in their shoes a little bit, and definitely not to the same extent at all, but we're honoring them. We have their names on like the sides of the cars, on the panel of the doors, and so that's why, in my opinion, because this has been back and forth, I don't think the race should be shortened. It's it's an experience and it's a crown jewel, and it's the longest race of the year by a stretch. I mean, we have the Daytona 500, but if that's one race that's way too long and it's just the only one in the season that fans are like, oh my goodness, I think that's fine. I think that's good. The symbolism of the event is so important. I think cutting it would just understate that importance. That is my take on it. I do want to transition now into lining up the odds. I have some stats here. As we talked about earlier, we talked about Hendrick Motorsports. We talked about Kurt Busch. I'm going to bring them up again too, but let's list off some of these numbers here, shall we? We have the last drivers to win this race, Brad Keselowski. We have the active driver with the most wins at this race. We have Harvick and Truex. And then the active driver with the best average finish at the track. Right now, that's run more than 3 races, because it would be Tyler Reddick, but the driver that has the best average with more than 3 races is Joey Logano with a 12.23. The team with the most wins at this race is Hendrick Motorsports with 11. And finally, the manufacturer with the most wins at this Coca-Cola 600 is Chevrolet with 24. So, Rob, you mentioned some of your race picks. I want a concrete answer. I want just one driver and then a garage pick. And I say that's concrete. This is more for myself. But what for a race pick for this event? Who would you go with and why?
So really, right now, and this is of course before qualifying and practice have taken place, but I'm still stand by it. Kyle Larson is still the favorite to me just because of the fact that he has been so good with the long run. And that's kind of been his detriment with a lot of these other races that he's finished second, because there's been a late race yellow or a bad pit stop that's created a short run to the finish. And it just doesn't allow him enough time to catch up to whoever's leading the race. But this is a long run race. It's 4 stages long. And as long as he keeps his nose clean in the first 2 or 3 stages, and he's still in the fight, when we get to lap 300 and beyond, as long as he's in the fight, I think he's the odds-on favorite. He's due a win in this race. But it's kind of been a hard one for him just because he'll run well and he can get caught up in his own crash or in someone else's mess. But I think, he'll put it together for sure. Now, in terms of a garage pick or dark horse, I mentioned him earlier, but I still think Kurt Busch is that dark horse pick, just because of the fact that he's been so steady in this race. 10th or better since 2015. And that's incredible to think about just because of the fact that a lot can happen in this race, and he just never has a mechanical failure. And he just knows how to race this track so well. And it's kind of funny that, it's happened since 2015, because the year before that was when he did the Indy Charlotte double. And even in that one, as tired as he was running in the top 10 in 2014 before, mechanical woes, took him out of the race. So if you are doing DraftKings or whatever you're doing, NASCAR.com fantasy situation, I see Kyle Larson and Kurt Busch, ironically former teammates,
Yes.
with the Ganassi connection they had. Those are my two. And then for an alternate, if you will, this is tough because it's going to be a stacked field for sure. You mentioned Joey Logano earlier with how consistent he's been. He's another one I'm thinking about just because of the fact that I think he's matured,
Yes.
depending on what part of the country you're from.
Yes.
He is definitely shown his gamesmanship as a driver. He still can be a troll when he has to be to others, but he just knows how to get the most out of his car. And he works with one of the best crew chiefs in the industry. That would be a factor for sure.
So mentioning Kurt Busch, I'm going to mention him in a second, but my race pick, we know Hendrick Motorsports is going to do well. We know they're going to do well in some capacity. I looked at the recent stats, and the ones that are sticking out to me with that team is Chase Elliott. I've picked Kyle Larson way too many times this season. I'm like, let's change it up. Let's go with Chase Elliott,
Yeah.
And the reason is, I have some of the numbers here, like, in the past few races at the track, he's finished in the past 5 races. He's finished inside the top 10 in the past 4. And then the last 2, I believe he's finished inside the top 5, and, so on and so on. So, he has really good standings here. He won at this track last year, not the 600, but he won last year. So I think even though, yes, this is a longer race, we really, take that into consideration just kind of lightly. I still think Chase Elliott does have a good chance. So he is my main race pick for this weekend. Now for my garage pick or backup pick, Rob, I had a feeling you were going to choose Kurt Busch, which, by the way, the best announcement I have seen in a while, announced that he is returning to the car next year, 2022, the next-gen car. He posted a hilariously brilliant, I don't know if you saw this, Rob, but
I did.
Yes, announcement on Twitter, and he's like, I'm staying, I'm not going anywhere, and I love Kurt Busch personally, so I'm like, thank goodness, I'm so excited. So he will be back in the car in 2022. Now, back to my garage pick, I wanted to change things up, so he is not my garage pick. So I decided to go with a driver. I don't know where anyone's really looking at this weekend, but I chose Ryan Blaney. And, statistically, he hasn't been that great at this track, but in the last 2 races, he's finished 3rd in both. And I think he has good momentum going this year. Joey Logano was another choice for me as well. And I obviously can't understate the success of the JGR team this season, especially Martin Truex Jr. Again, could have chosen him, but I've chosen him way too much this season. So I have to go with Ryan Blaney as my backup pick because I think he has the potential to do well. If not win the race, he'll at least do well. So those are our garage picks, our backup picks. I want to close out this video saying thank you so much for listening to Above the Yellow Line. It's where we talk about all things NASCAR Cup Series. Stay tuned for the Coca-Cola 600. It starts Sunday, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. Like I mentioned earlier, practice and qualifying are actually happening, and practice is at 7 o'clock Friday or tonight, whenever you're watching this. And the qualifying is tomorrow, Saturday at 11:05 in the morning. Rob, thank you so much for joining the show. I really enjoyed picking your brain with a few things, talking to you about your story. Before we close, where can our viewers find you? Where else can we look for your content?
Besides the podiumfinish.net, I'm also the ARCA editor and a contributor for ARCA and other series on frontstretch.com. And I'm also a contributor for exoconsulting.net. That's a website that is run by Dr. Aaron Studwell, otherwise known as Race Weather on Twitter. So you can find me on there. And eventually I'm going to have my own podcast again. Not a competitor to yours, but it's the Podium Finishes reboot of the podcast, and those where you can find me. I also want to say you really make me proud of what you do with your dreams in this industry. I'm so happy to see you succeed, and I hope this podcast continues to thrive and grow. And I know, whether it's with us or, if your future takes you elsewhere, I know you're going to do such a great job in the sport. So keep it up. I'm always happy to be a friend and a mentor to you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, Rob is such a great mentor. Has been such a great teacher. So thank you so much. I do have an announcement coming next week about some other places where you could find my work. But until then, I want to mention for more content from me, check out my Twitter page for more race day coverage and also just daily NASCAR updates. I'll echo Rob by saying, check out the Podium Finish. We have great content. Rob, you just interviewed Kyle Busch. You interviewed Alex Bowman, AJ Allmendinger, and you also interviewed Will Power just on the IndyCar side of things. A great interviews. Make sure you check those out. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel as well to keep up with the content, and tell your family and friends. And while you do that, thank you again so much for supporting Above the Yellow Line. And until next time, we'll see ya.
Salute.